We are in the seventh and final week of our current series looking at simplifying our lives, especially through the process of decluttering. Today we're going to look at one of the most challenging areas to declutter, appropriately enough since it's Valentine's weekend. We're looking today at decluttering our hearts. Our hearts are vital, not just to life, but to quality of life. The Bible says, above all else, guard your heart, for from it flows the wellspring of life. So watch over your heart, because you live and love from your heart. You work and lead from your heart. You parent from your heart. The heart is the wellspring of life, and it can so easily become cluttered with lots of different and difficult emotions. Today we have time to look at just one of them, but it's a big one. In fact, you can probably say it is the big one. To help us out, we're going to take a closer look at the gospel passage we just read from, once again taken from the Sermon on the Mount found in Matthew's gospel. In these verses, in this sermon, Jesus deals with what Christian living looks like. But he doesn't just begin with grand theology. He plunges straight into feelings and emotions, virtues and vices, the stuff of everyday life. By the way, if you haven't taken me up on my encouragement to read the Sermon on the Mount, which is found in chapters 5, 6, and 7 of St. Matthew's Gospel, well, consider doing that in your quiet time this week. It is a great way to prepare for Lent, and it really is only about a 10-minute read. We're just looking today at the first injunction that Jesus makes in the sermon, dealing with one of the primary emotions that all of us experience, that can so effectively and completely clutter our heart. Jesus says, and we heard it today, "You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment." So as the nation of Israel was established, in the Exodus, God gave the Ten Commandments to Moses, which include the prohibition against murder. Now, admittedly, that was a pretty low bar for good behavior. But even so, it was kind of a new idea at the time, one that, when honored, provided a basic foundation for civility in society. However, Jesus says that in the community that he's forming, whoever is angry is liable to judgment. Not just angry enough to murder, but angry. Wow, that's pretty strict and striking. Why? Well, because more than any other emotion, anger really can clutter the heart. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with the experience of anger in and of itself. In some situations, anger just makes sense. Like when we have wounds from the past that just haven't quite healed yet. We can become angry as a way of sort of protecting our heart. There is also such a thing as righteous anger. It is right to be angry at injustice. There are times and situations where we should be angry. In fact, Jesus himself experienced and expressed anger. But the Bible acknowledges that we will be angry, and that anger is a universal emotion. But the Bible also says, be angry, but do not sin. Be angry, but do not sin. So what's the distinction there? Well, anger itself is not the sin. Holding on to it is. And people hold on to anger differently. Some people express it internally. They turn anger inward, and it becomes things like guilt and shame, cynicism, and bitterness. Others turn their anger outwards, and they do that to hurt and harm people through passive-aggressive behavior. Still others are quite open in their expression of anger. Raised voices, clenched fists, violent behavior, road rage, and in its extreme expression, murder, such as we tragically witnessed in Tumbler Ridge, BC, just this past week. Anger hurts our hearts, and others feel our anger too. And nobody wants to be around it. Nobody wants to be around you when you're angry. The root cause of so many dysfunctions and broken relationships in families and workplaces and among friends is anger that we hold on to and will not let go of. Elsewhere, St. Paul goes even further. He warns that anger, when not dealt with quickly, becomes a foothold or a springboard that the devil uses against us to damage or destroy our other relationships. Jesus continues, "Whoever insults their brother or sister, raga, will be liable to the council, and whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire, Gehenna." Now that word, raga, was an Aramaic word that was used in Jesus' day to express contempt for another person. It was an onomatopoeia, a word like bang or pow, where the sound of the word and the meaning of the word are similar. Kind of like watching Batman back in the day, right? Bam, pow. In this case, the sound someone makes when they're spitting. It would be the equivalent of spitting on someone. And that was the ultimate sign of contempt. And calling someone a fool was more than an insult. It was a deliberate curse. And the point is that sooner or later, our words reveal the anger that we're carrying in our hearts, however hard we try to hide it. Even worse, Jesus says holding on to anger makes us liable to the hell of fire. The word that Jesus used was Gehenna. So what's that? What's Gehenna? Well, Gehenna was the city dump just outside Jerusalem. It's where you took your trash there to be burned. But the fires were never completely extinguished. The place was always a smoldering, smoking, hot mess. And if you think about it, that's just like our experience of anger. Sometimes it's like a fire that flames up. And sometimes it's just smoldering and smoking beneath the surface. But it's always a hot mess. And it's true. Our hearts can burn for many things, especially for those we love, and hopefully for the love of God too. But our hearts can burn with anger. And that's not usually about loving anyone. That's why we've got to deal with it. But how do we do that? How do we deal with anger? Well, Jesus tells us. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Now, here he's actually helping us understand just how big a deal anger really is. See, back in Jesus' day, nothing was more important than temple worship. Nothing. It took precedence over absolutely everything. But Jesus says that anger is such a huge issue, and reconciliation is so important to God that it even preempts worship. Before you worship, go first and be reconciled. When relationships break down, it's very rare that one person is 100% wrong and the other person is 100% right. Most of the time, both parties share some of the blame. So what Jesus is saying here is, own your part. You feel angry with someone? Okay, fine, that happens. But own your part of the problem, which can actually help release the anger from your heart. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, it frees the other person to own their part. What Jesus is doing here is helping us see what's really going on in our hearts. And at the same time, showing us what a kingdom heart looks like. So what's that? What's a kingdom heart? Well, a kingdom heart is a heart under God's rule and reign. And a kingdom heart always does everything it possibly can to reconcile a relationship. Are some relationships irreconcilable? Yes. Is it possible that you will own your part and the other person will not? Yes. Is it possible that the other person will take advantage of the situation to embarrass you and humiliate you? Yes. Do you always do this yourself, Father Jerry? No. I'm just as challenged at this as anyone else. I want to prove that my anger is righteous. I want to prove that I'm right and they're wrong. But here's the thing. When I focus on how right I am and how wrong they are, my anger actually grows. And that's not a good thing. Finally, Jesus gives us another illustration. He says, "Come to terms quickly with your accuser. Otherwise, your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison." In other words, you're probably not as right as you think you are. So own your part of the problem before it becomes a bigger problem. Okay, but isn't reconciliation sometimes simply impossible? Yes, unfortunately, it is. There are some relationships that cannot be unbroken. And there could be people that you should not reconcile with because they're either toxic or they're dangerous. In those cases, it's not about reconciliation. It's about forgiveness. Forgiveness is the other way to clean up the clutter of anger in our hearts. Now, people very often confuse reconciliation and forgiveness, but they are different. Reconciliation is putting a relationship back together. Forgiveness is simply canceling a debt. Forgiveness simply says, you don't owe me anymore. I deserve to be treated better. I deserve your help. I deserve the truth. You owed me more, but now you don't. Debt canceled. Forgiveness is not saying it didn't matter. It did matter. Forgiveness is not saying you weren't hurt. You were hurt. Forgiveness isn't saying they weren't wrong. They were wrong. Forgiveness simply cancels the debt. Because that's what Christ did for us. That's what Christ did for you and for me on the cross. As the saying goes, unforgiveness is drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. Forgiveness is releasing a prisoner and realizing the prisoner was you. So let me ask you, who are you angry at? Where is there a strained relationship in your life right now? Maybe this is the week to say two small and simple words. I'm sorry. Next to I love you, I'm sorry is the most powerful thing you could ever say. If reconciliation isn't possible or advisable, forgiveness is. Forgiveness always is. Just cancel the debt in some deliberate way. Write it down in a journal or speak it out loud. Maybe do it in front of a mirror even. Name the person and say, you don't owe me anymore. I am canceling the debt. Now maybe you're not ready to do either of that right now. But that's okay. Maybe the hurt is just too deep. The wounds are too fresh. So why not make plans now to join us starting next week for our brand new series that's all about healing. We're going to be talking about all kinds of healing, including the healing that comes from reconciliation and forgiveness. Life is messy, for sure. And clutter makes it worse. In fact, it can leave us feeling trapped. Decluttering our space, our minds, our schedules, our our souls and our hearts brings freedom and clarity. Freedom and clarity to see God at work in us and around us. Decluttering makes more room for God and God's grace.